Hey everyone, welcome back to Outside the System. Today's episode is going to be a bit different. It's the first episode of a new series called Outside the System Labs. With the series, I'll be highlighting extremely early stage solutions to systemic problems along with the people building them. If you're a builder or hope to build something in the future, I think you'll get a lot of value from these episodes. The one you're about to listen to is my conversation with Peter Conley. Peter is building Unbundled, a marketplace for buyers and sellers of higher ed alternatives, allowing students to customize their higher education experience to exactly what they're looking for. If you enjoy this episode, you'll also like episode 3, where I interviewed Mitch Earl of Praxis. You can help support the show by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple, telling your friends, and supporting the show financially with Bitcoin on Fountain or any other podcasting 2.0 app. And of course, let me know on Twitter what you think about the new labs format. Let's get started. Peter, thanks for coming on Outside the System today.
Appreciate you having me on, Neil.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about unbundling education, and I think you're building something in this space, but I've talked about this problem on the show before, at least the issues with higher ed, of which there are many. I had Mitch Earl on, I think his episode 3, to talk about Praxis, which is a really good episode for anyone who hasn't listened to that. Particularly, we talked a lot more in that one, I think, than what we're going to talk today about student debt. But I think that does relate to what you all are building and kind of some of the things that you're working on today. So I don't want to steal your thunder. I'll let you introduce yourself and what you're working on. But I think anybody who enjoyed the episode about Praxis is really going to get a good one here.
Appreciate that. Yeah, so my name is Peter Conley. I am the founder and CEO of a startup called Unbundled. Um, I pitch it kind of as like an Airbnb of higher education. So the core concept is taking um, loosely bundled or separate businesses like online coding boot camps, like Bloom Tech, like Gridiron, like General Assembly, and then creating a marketplace for students that are interested in that, but also want a physical, in real life college experience, and finding existing colleges that have excess dorm capacity, whether that be lack of admission or just they've overbuilt infrastructure, and getting those students to become actual residents, but not have the core program of the undergrad or minors and majors of the program. And then obviously trying to build other ancillary services like potentially learning pods to get on the platform, not just college campuses, and then hopefully programs like David Perel's Rite of Passage.
Yeah, because I think like right now, and one thing you and I have talked about before is just all the services that colleges have to offer today, and it's like this bundle that you essentially are subscribing to, but isn't really, those things don't necessarily all have to go together. Like, some of the things, right, that are part of it is the actual courses, the admissions process, like research, the sports, I guess, food, all this stuff that isn't necessarily like, I think in a historical sense, maybe had to be on the same campus. But
Correct.
today,
Yeah.
because of the internet, doesn't necessarily have to be on the same campus, and actually probably can be done better with sort of a different model. And so, not to mention the bloat, right, on the administrative side, which is
Which
a
we'll get
whole
into.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, is that how you would think of the problem, or that how you would frame the problem? That's kind of how I think about it. Is that it's like almost an outdated. There's still useful elements to the product, but it's an outdated form factor to deliver education.
100%. I think that's the perfect way to frame it. Is it's a one size fits all, one product offering that you can't unbundle, and it's kind of grown into this one mass of a product over time, and has just compounded, and the systems keep reinforcing itself. Um, and like you said, like most colleges have to do admissions, or at least they outsource it, but they have to sift through the admissions. They have facilities management, housing, healthcare, credentialing, food service, athletic facilities, and most of the best companies in the world like are amazing at one or two things. Like obviously there is difference, or there is exceptions to the rule, like Amazon, but not every college is going to be like Amazon. And a lot of those core product offerings like aren't related. Like imagine if a Mexican restaurant has to also file your taxes, sell hardware hats, make a SaaS product, have a massage on staff. Like the burrito quality is going to suffer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're not spending all their time getting really really freaking good at this one thing.
Exactly. And so their core product, at least what students go for, is the education is going to suffer when your bandwidth, your capital bandwidth, your managerial bandwidth is split across all these different functions. And like obviously they outsource, right? They have third parties that construct the townhouses and potentially have vendors for the food services, but they still have to manage it. They still have to understand that, X amount of students means X amount of Y amount of meals that they have to provide and still spin all those plates. Yeah, at the core of it is just one lump sum product that, um, what if specialization of the marketplace were able to come in, I believe it'll just be a 10x better experience for the students.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing is that because of all these different products, there's a bit of a convoluted customer base, right? It's like who is actually the customer? And I think, on some level that could be the students, right? I could see that on some level being the students. On another level, it could be the parents who are paying for some of this. On another level, it could be companies who are trying to recruit workers from this population. On another level, it could be grad schools, which are trying to get grad students from this population. On another level, I guess you could even say it's like the alumni who are donating to the school, right? And there's just like so many convoluted customer maps here that you could draw of like who is actually the customer. And I think because of that, you just end up with a lot of competing priorities, and then you can't really do anything uh, in a world class way.
100% agree. And like the core user that has the most skin in the game, to use a Talibism, is the student, right? At the end of the day, well, obviously, unless the parents are floating the bill for the education, but most of the time, student walks out the end, and yet all those other needs or voices have marketing towards them and just other services built. But at the end of the day, it's the student that has the bank account or the student debt and just the cost that accrues solely to them on the other side.
Yeah, and not even that, it's the rest of their own life that they have to live right off of that. So it's like they're hoping to get the skills to, ensure they can make a living in the future. And yeah, the parents obviously have a lot of skin in the game, but because of the financial cost if they're the ones footing the bill, but the student does in terms of the, this is their life essentially. So so I guess in your opinion, why can't colleges pivot, or why don't they pivot? Like, is it just because they're like not internet native? Is it incentives? What's stopping them from fixing this?
Yeah, I think it's heavy fixed costs and incentives to begin with. I don't think it's maliciousness, right? There's plenty of provosts and admins. They recognize the problem. I mean, it's been talked about for a decade ad nauseum, and obviously it's moving into the public consciousness just with the student loan debt bill that's come in and kind of reinvigorated the public debate about it. Um, but I think they have two big cons against them. And first, we'll talk about incentives. So, in terms of the the student debt of incentives, the colleges get the money. They get paid from Freddie Mae, Sally Mac, or Freddie Mac, Sally Mae, up front, and so they're not. They have that money in the door, and then whatever services they provide is kind of decoupled from the actual outcome on the other end of the student. And I'll give you a counterexample. So I graduated in May from Bloom Tech, the online coding bootcamp, formerly known as Lambda School. It was created by Austin Allred. He started in 2017. We've had thousands of alumni that have gone through the gates and have been gainfully employed on the other side. And one of the big reasons why it's been so popular and why it works is because they use a financial tool called ISAs, or income share agreements, meaning that your tuition, you don't start paying until you land a job post education, making at least 50 grand a year or more. And your tuition comes directly from the income of your new paychecks with the job that was related to your training. And it's 17% for 24 months, and then it goes away. And there's also a hard cap at it at 30K. So there are some students that go through their 6 month program or take 10 months in case they repeat units. Coming out the other end is Amazon engineers making 140K, and then just do that bump in income they pay off their debt within 18 months, sometimes 16, 14 months. And so it aligns the fate of the program, Bloom Tech, with the fate of the student. It's like the ultimate form of skin in the game. Because
Yep.
if Bloom Tech can't churn out educated students that are ready for the marketplace, they don't exist. They go bankrupt. Whereas on the current education system side, because it's government funding most of the time for student loans, they get the money, and no matter what product, education, training that they instill in their students on the other side, like it's all good. And
Yeah.
I think, do you ever read the Fiat Standard by Safety and a Moose?
I've read the Bitcoin standard. I haven't read the fiat standard, which is the newer one, right? That's the second one that he wrote. Yeah, it's on my list. I haven't gotten there yet, and I actually hope to have him on the podcast at some point. He would be like a dream guest.
He'd be awesome, man. Fiat Standard is beautiful. He flips it like looking at the current fiat money system. If it was a software product, like what are its properties and like what are the downstream effects of it? And one of the
Mm,
major chapters he talks about is education, and just the fact that there's been the government created the demand and has been through money printing and created and keep propagating the student loan system. It's created all these knock-on effects because there's no direct tie to the outcomes of the people actually funding it, and so it kind of created into a mutated system. And there was a hilarious video I saw on Twitter a couple of weeks ago of Elizabeth Warren interviewing the heads of the major banks. So Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan Chase and all of them, and she was just ignorantly grilling into them like, why are you adding to the student loan process and crisis? And they're like, we stopped providing this as products years ago. All of them, all the major banks said like, this isn't a viable product from an ROI standpoint. And
mm,
so basically what I'm getting at is the free market is saying like, this doesn't make sense. There's no ROI. It doesn't pan out. And like, it's not creating productive people in the workforce. And so the only reason why it subsists, the system, is because the government backs student loans. So that was a long frame up of basically the financial incentives behind it. It's totally disconnected from the outcome the students want and like responsibility and core outcomes and connections that the colleges want. And then two would be the heavy fixed costs to kind of circle back to all the functions the colleges have to provide, admissions, healthcare, and all that. Like a lot of those are brick and mortar, and they have the physical infrastructure, and just due to the arms race of trying to get students in the door, they're kind of building like quasi Disneyland experiences for 18-year-olds and 22-year-olds, like lazy rivers, rock climbing walls, social functions. And then they have another fixed cost they can't shed is tenured professors of people that they just can't fire, right? Like in
by law,
in
yeah, or by agreement, I guess, not by law,
yeah, by
but
agreement.
by
Yeah,
contract. Yeah.
I haven't dived into the contract. I'm sure there's some stipulations, but there's just lack of incentives once professors get to a certain point, right? Their performance can drop or they can be checked out, and there's just lack of aligned incentives there. And then um, you have ever expanding administrative class like diversity, inclusion, equity, leadership departments that just keep growing. Like you mentioned up top, like the bureaucracy bloat is getting insane. I would love to bookmark it. There was a chart on Twitter I saw of like the amount of administrators in the higher education system and like starting in the compared to the ratio of professors, and it's just like a straight line up into the right starting around the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, probably 1971, right?
Yeah, yeah. It, it's it's crazy how many things went wrong there. Do you know
I know
the World Economic Forum was started in 1971?
that I saw that recently. That's
Yeah.
unfortunately not surprising, just given everything else that happened in 1971. There's must have been some kind of like wormhole in 1971 that sent us down some kind of weird parallel universe or something. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I would
yeah,
blame the
well,
simulation, but computers weren't at that point yet, so who knows?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. No, but I think to your point about the administrative bloat, it's like it's kind of like in a company, right? It's like if there's no reason for somebody to try to eliminate their own job, and if anything, they're going to try to like make their job seem more impossible to be eliminated, right? And this is actually one of the hard things that I think in the startup situation, largely there's more to be done than there are people. And so the more automation and efficiency you can drive, the easier your life is, because otherwise it's crazy. Whereas in a larger company, that doesn't always, it's sometimes like a perfect one to one, the right amount of work and the right amount of people, or maybe even more people than there is work to do. And people aren't going to like voluntarily find ways to eliminate their job. And now in a university situation, if you even have things like tenure that make it impossible to eliminate people. And, the other thing is like there is something that's fundamentally changed about the world post internet, which is one person, you're not constrained by geography anymore, is what I should say.
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
One person who's the best at teaching something can teach. I mean, look at Khan Academy. Like, that's crazy, right? Like, one guy wasn't even a professor or a professional, right? He wasn't even a professional teacher, right?
I don't think.
I mean,
I don't
yeah,
know.
I don't.
It sounds right. Yeah.
Let's see. We can
Look
we
it
can
up. Yeah.
fact check
Yeah.
ourselves. Khan
Jamie,
Academy. Let's
pull that
see.
up, Jamie.
Exactly. We don't have a Jamie yet, but
Yeah.
okay, Sal Khan. No, he began tutoring his cousin Nadia in mathematics over the internet using Yahoo's Doodle Notepad. When other relatives and friends sought his tutoring, he moved his tutorials to YouTube, where he created an account on November 16th, 2006. The popularity of his the popularity of his educational videos on the video sharing website prompted Khan to quit his job as a financial analyst in late 2009. Wild. Like, but that's the kind of thing that can happen on the internet, which wasn't possible before. So you're kind of like, it would be kind of like if Blockbuster was like required by law for some reason and like supported by the government, and yet there was also this alternative way of like streaming any movie you want to your TV. And
That's a
then
perfect
yet most of
example.
the, yeah, and like most of the money was flowing to the Blockbuster business model.
100%.
Like,
Yeah, imagine if Blockbuster was subsidized by the federal government, starting in the 90s. They could potentially still be around of
yeah.
the hundreds
Oh
of
yeah.
billions or trillions that went into higher education. And it would be like laughable and people would, I don't know if they'd still go there, but that's a great parallel example.
Well, for education, there's a little bit of because this is the part that isn't necessarily incentives, but well, it flows from incentives, but it's like there's also like the psyop almost of like, well, you got to go to college. Like, I think people conflate college with education, right? Those are like, I think education is a very important thing, and like, there's a bunch of idiots on Twitter who like pretend you don't need education, right? Those people
Yeah,
aren't. I'm not saying what those people are saying is right. The but the thing is, like, college doesn't necessarily equal education, and that's where I think there's a little bit of a mix up.
100%. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Mark Twain, and he says, "I never let my education, or no, excuse me, I never let my schooling interfere with my education."
Yep.
And I think we
Yeah.
don't have, I don't think we have a higher education system. I think we have a higher schooling system.
Yeah, and that's kind of created for not for necessarily the student, but for these other sort of functions that are out there. I
100%.
mean, I
And
guess
it,
I guess like, have you seen? So obviously, it sounds like Bloom Tech, right? That's what you said.
correct, yeah.
Yeah. So
Formerly known
they're.
as Lambda School, yeah.
I mean, how big have they gotten, or how what's the approximate footprint that they have?
I think they've had at least 3,000 alumni through their
Oh
doors
wow.
that are gainfully employed at this point. And then they recently had a layoff, so from like a employee count, I think they're at 200. But they alone have educated and gotten gainful employment of at least 3,000 alumni.
Are there other places like that? I know, like Praxis, we had talked to on this show before, but are there other like? Is this like one of many, or is Bloom Tech kind of like unique in that regard?
There's definitely ones that are older and new ones popping up, but the ones that have online programs, some also have in person. Would be like
Yep.
Flatiron School, General Assembly, and Coding Dojo.
Do you think? And since you went through this program, you're probably very qualified to talk about it. Like, what is it like? Like, is it like online lectures? Is it like? I mean, it's purely remote, right? There's no in person component.
Correct, purely remote. Yeah, it was purely remote
Yeah.
for 9 months. It is typically 6 months if you pass all 6 units straight up. But what's beautiful about it is they incorporated a flex option. So in every unit was about a month, and if you didn't fully integrate the material, you could just flex that unit. And I flexed um, front end, back end, which was hard to say the least. And then I think the computer science unit. So yeah, it was purely online for a period of 9 months. And then in terms of like what that looked like day to day, it was for the first 4 units, it was Monday through Thursday. We'd had pre-coursework, so we'd have a link to Instructure. It's just the kind of online curriculum startup, or just where they manage all the course material, and it would have sometimes documentation, videos, practice problems that you run through in order to prep for the specific thing you'd be learning, whether it be use effects, hooks, if you're learning advanced CSS, whatever that particular day. We'd be prepped on it, and then we'd have a 2-hour lecture in real time over Zoom with a actual teacher that, software engineer by practice, and they typically specialize in that specific unit, whether it be CSS and HTML or React or Node.js. They're pretty good at finding specialized people. And then afterwards, we'd have an automated test project that would have 8 to 20 different tests where you'd have a coding problem, and it'd be automated, and you can see how many codes you passed based on, or excuse me, how many tests you passed based on the code you written, and then you'd submit it into the Instructure portal, and then they'd have your grades. And then on that was Monday through Thursday, and then they had TA hours, they had open access on a Slack channel to the instructors in real time. And then on Friday, we had our sprints, where it was just a project with automated testing. And we'd have the whole day to work on it. And I think it opened at midnight, and then you had to submit it by like 10 p.m. that night. And then in order to
Did you
pass
find
yep.
did you find that this was a good, since now you're working and have applied this to the real world, did you find that this form of learning was applicable to like what you've seen in real life, or was there still a bit of a, because I feel like with college there's always like what you learn in college doesn't really flow into what you learn, like you're going to be doing in your actual job, largely, not always, but there's usually like a big gap there, at least in my experience there was, between what I learned in the classroom and what I had to apply to real life. What was that gap like for this, for Bloom Tech?
Next to no. I like walked into my new job. So I still have a day job, and I work for the startup called Vercel, which is a front end hosting platform. And they partnered with Bloom Tech to get specific hires. And on 5 months in, I started using Vercel in Bloom Tech just to publish and spin up new applications. And then they ended up being my employer. So not only was I aware of the product of like what I was selling 3 months later after getting hired, like I had repetitions on it, and they hired specifically for the skill set of learning React, using GitHub, and just all the tech stack we've used. So there was like, for me at least, there's going to be differences, right? Like there's people that got hired for airlines or General Electric, and I'm sure that tech stacks, there's a disconnect between our specific
Yeah.
curriculum. But for me personally, it was like a literal direct line into employment with the skills
Wow.
learned.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a pretty good, I guess depends on the employer, but at least in your experience, it was a pretty good kind of one to one.
Yeah,
And
and I don't know if current colleges do this, but they have at Bloom Tech, they had positions directly dedicated to talking to employers and hiring managers of like, what do you guys need? Like, are you shifting to Ruby on Rails? Is Next.js getting hot? And like they'll tweak their curriculum according to that.
oh, so they're trying to have like a little bit of a iterative curriculum almost, even depending on what the
Yeah,
market's looking for. And,
yeah,
and I guess like,
yeah,
do employers pay Bloom Tech to recruit through them? Like, are they making money on both sides?
I think so. Don't quote me on that,
It's
but
a
I'm
good
pretty
business
sure.
model.
Yeah, and I don't know if they discontinued it, but they had, I forgot if it was called like Bloom Tech Custom, where they would get contractually employers, whether it be Stripe or Amazon or whoever, that said, okay, we need 20 Rust junior engineers. Sometimes it's an obscure language that isn't taught in schools, or just it's a little bit unorthodox, but they need a team and they need junior devs of that language. And so they'll contractually agree to hire X amount of engineers, and then they spin off and do a specialized course or add in units for that specific tech stack. So it was,
Interesting.
yeah,
So
they made
yeah,
money through the students, and then obviously the partnership of hiring.
yeah, it's a pretty good business model. What do you say to people, or like, people who are parents maybe who might be concerned about this, where it's like, yeah, like the traditional college model is not ideal. Like it's way too expensive. Like they're not learning the most career applicable things, but like you become like college is about more than just the education. Like it's about being on your own for the first time. And like, you're kind of in still this like controlled environment, but you're more on your own than obviously you were in high school. What do you say to people who are like, well, the education is only a piece of what college is, and then like how do you replace that outside of the higher ed system today?
Yeah, it's totally fair. First and foremost, I don't think like what I'm building is for everyone. I don't think it'll replace all the monolithic one size fits all. Like if you're a student athlete, I'm not planning on building out, sports facilities or partnering with that. If you're in law or medicine, like I don't want my neurosurgeon to have a degree from YouTube channel for brain
Yeah.
science, right? But there is obviously certain career paths that are popping up that I think this is um, will be hyper impactful for data science, full stack development, design, etc. And so one, that option is always available, right? If they want to go do the 4 year, figure out, grow. Um, but why someone would choose this is it's de-risked. So, like I mentioned before, I didn't have to start paying until I landed my job, and it gives you a skill set that the market demands. And also, like worst case scenario, you go through this program, it takes 6 months, you pay off your loans in 24 months, and then you're a 21-year-old saying, "Oh, maybe I'll get a history degree at Penn State." Right? Opposed to the 4 year time commitment of standard school plus X amount of years of debt. Like if you start that path and make that decision as a 17-year-old, it's kind of not fully constricted you, but like there are constrictions until you pay that debt off maybe well into your 30s. So one is de-risk, and two, you could have both options if you want. But my another argument would be part of the reason why you go to college is for the network, right?
Yeah. Yep.
We've all heard the cliche quotes like your network is your net worth. My argument is that you want to be ahead of the crowd. Like who's the most like well capitalized, famous company alumni network like as of right now? It's the PayPal Mafia. And for them to start a payments internet company in the late 90s was insane. Like it was atypical, it was really out there, but clearly they saw where the puck was going, and typically good things will happen and pay out if you build a network around where the puck is going,
Right.
right? So and at the end to like address the arguments of the hypothetical parents here is like they won't fit in, or this isn't traditional. It's like you want that. Like it's a low risk bet with potentially having a network of students who are understanding the old model isn't ROI positive. The old model doesn't take uh, uh, into calculation of like how quickly technology is moving, and that skills are like skills can't be taken away, and skills are typically what get you a better career path. And so you're more likely to join um, an alumni network that understands where the puck is going.
By doing one of these types of programs.
Correct.
Did you go to a regular college also and then go into this, or what was your path
Yeah.
to getting into
Yeah.
this? Yeah.
So I went to a standard 4 year undergraduate degree, born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and I graduated high school in '08. And from '08 to 2012, I attended SUNY Geneseo and got a business administration degree, which I now feel like is basically as useful as like a degree in basket weaving. Like it's like like business administration is one of those kind of like that can fall in the bucket of like communications, or that's like a very ephemeral where you kind of get exposure to a lot of things but not much like hard
I,
depth.
I agree. I think the only exception I've ever seen with that is people who do finance specialization within business administration tend to have at least like some Excel skills and some number skills, some data skills, and are especially pretty good at like napkin math. I've noticed, but
100%. Yeah, I agree.
outside of that, it's a little bit ephemeral to your point. And even the finance one can be like hit or miss. I think it also really depends on the person doing it.
100%. Yeah. And so, yeah, I went from '08 to 2012, business administration. I almost got a psychology minor, but pretty standard college experience. A lot of partying. Not too much of like developing skill sets or publishing online or just like things that would serve me now. And then I exited the job market. I graduated in May. Excuse me. I entered the job market May 2012, and was just kind of like hit in the face. It was just like
Yep.
it, understanding like there's obviously people years ahead of me with these developed skills, and my degree was more or less becoming a commodity at that point. I think now more so, it's probably a lot worse. 10 years in the future, but even back then in 2012, um, it was, a lot of people were having undergraduate degrees, and so I, I believe over the course of 2.5 years, I was in tried 4 different industries. Service industry. I was in medical sales. I worked for AmeriCorps, the government agency similar to the Peace Corps, but it's a domestic program. Um, and then, like the stereotypical tech pro that I am, I read the 4 Hour Work Week in 2013, and mind blown. Like, oh, you can leverage the internet to make money while you sleep, which is a lot harder than it sounds. But just like the idea of
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like the idea of leveraging the internet as a tool to create a sales page that can work while you sleep, or just all these other things, um, came in my awareness, and then from there I shifted into digital marketing, and for about a period of um, 4 years, I worked as an account manager for a digital marketing firm um, that was one part SEO and one part web design. And so I started to understand like being able to develop tech-based skills were could be super important, and like that's where the world was going. But I felt kind of in like I was put in like tech purgatory of having like personal skills, but like no hardcore skills. Like I wasn't writing at the time. I wasn't technical in SEO. Definitely wasn't a developer. And so after that program is where there's a little time in between, but that's when I was there, I started considering Bloomsec because I heard him like the founder Austin Allard was going along on these podcasts to promote it, and I always wanted to learn that skill set of full stack development and understanding how applications are built from scratch. And so finally had the time, space, and money in my life to take 9 months off the job market, go through Bloom Tech, and then come out the other end better for it. And I
Yep.
never made more than 50 grand as an account manager, and basically increased my income by 60%, more than 60%, in my current job
Wow.
in a 9 month span. So like if you just kind of look at my career path, like it was 4 year degree, capped at 50 grand from that education, and then going through this program just felt like it put me on a rocket ship path for just a different trajectory for my career.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true whether you stay in a regular career, meaning working for other companies, or you also now have a skill set that lets you even take your own idea and take it really far just by yourself, because you can
100%.
you can write code, you can, I mean, you obviously could sell, and like you have the soft skills. So it's like now you have both, which is kind of like being a unicorn in the in the job market, that you have hard and soft skills.
100%. Yeah, and it's ironically enough, I'm not a developer for my day job Vercel. I'm in technical sales,
Yep.
and that's fine with me. Like, it obviously would have been cool to like ship code and learn that, but just to use your words, being a unicorn, being in sales, knowing how developers create pull requests, like understanding how to debug a console log with certain terminal errors coming, like it's been invaluable for me, and I'll always have that skill set.
Especially in a role where you're selling a technical product. It's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be really hard to do that without knowing any of this, no matter how
Yeah. I
good
think.
of a salesperson you are.
Yeah, I think it'll be impossible. Computer science is one of those things where if you try to fake it by someone who knows computer science, it's
It
easy
will
to sniff out.
be, yes, very easy to sniff out. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And like, yeah, I think it's so your background is really interesting, how you kind of landed here, because you kind of went through this by personal experience. And the funny thing is, I mean, you mentioned a couple things there that I just want to, before we move on, like make sure we talk about is you talked about you got out of college, you didn't have kind of the, you were saying you didn't write code, you didn't write in general too much. And it's like one of those things where I think right now one of the mismatches between how colleges think and how the real world operates is the real world right now is really operating off of like artifacts of like proof that you actually can do what you're talking about, or proof that you maybe at the earlier in your career it's more proof that you are a good learner, or that you're curious, or that you're a good speaker, good writer. You just have good instincts, right? I think like early on in someone's career, companies are looking for that proof point, because now to your point about like 2012 versus now, I mean, now you have access to talent all over the world. Like
Yes.
I think that is I don't think Americans yet quite appreciate how many people are coming for their lunch money. like it's
all of
just
them. Yeah.
everybody, because you make so much more money here, and you now can make that money without having to be here. So you can stay at your low cost basis in India or like wherever else in the world, Eastern Europe, wherever you are, and can make US money in terms of like the revenue that you're getting. And so it's a very, very tempting prize. So having those hard skills just become even more important, is where I'm going with that.
100%. And
Uh,
to like double click on that, like kind of on a stream of thought. So up top, I mentioned colleges obviously have to fulfill the functions of credentialing, and I have a thesis eventually that'll be outsourced to third parties, and it kind of already is. Specifically,
okay.
there's a startup called Credly that gave me my full stack certification from Bloomtech. They kind of have a testing or a third party process where they confirm I actually shipped the code that I did, and this is my profile on GitHub. And we're getting to the place of the internet with tools. I mean, just like simple blogs, tweets, and then your GitHub profile. Like that is your diploma. Like it's like a very hard to fake thing where you have a body of work that's proof of work that is like more tangible and more in depth, um, that an employer can sift through and read. I give this example, like what's more an honest signal of like knowing computer science and being a software engineer? Having a 4-year computer science degree from the University of Texas. I mean, Austin already talked about this. Some programs, you can get a degree in computer science without writing a line of code. I forgot what school it's from.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can have that diploma, or you can have a 2-year-old GitHub profile with green tiles all the way long, with 10 working applications that have been deployed, and you can just see in real time like their skill set and their proof of work. Like at the end of the day,
Well, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's that proof of work. I mean, that's not to dive too deep into the Bitcoin side of things, but like that proof of, which I know you and I could probably do a whole separate episode on. But it's that proof of work that so that's literally the point I was trying to make a second ago, which I didn't use that terminology because I didn't quite make that connection, but that is exactly what it is. It's proof of work. It's, can you write? Okay, there's one thing to say you have this degree in English or something from some school. It's another thing to have 100 essays on your Substack,
Yeah,
right? And
like,
like,
or a
yeah,
thousand paid prescribers per month, and
yep,
10,000 page views per week that you can share the Google Analytics to.
yep,
Like not only you can see your skill, you can see that the market likes it. And
yes,
and so at the end of the day, your diploma is just an abstraction of what you learned, and online proof of work is like actually what you did.
right. Is actually what you did. It's not about what you say you can do or what this third party says you can do. It's like the actual, this is what you can do.
100%.
Yeah.
And David Perel, for people who don't know, he created a school called the Rite of Passage, which I also an alumni of. I went through his cohort 9 program in October. He talks about feedback loops all the time. So like in the current education system, you're writing behind closed doors. You give your paper to a professor, and it like rarely sees the light of day.
Yep.
Whereas where you write online and do your proof of work in public, you get feedback from the market and sometimes very smart people in real time to hone your craft.
Yep. Yeah. I think, I forget who says this, but there's somebody, it might be David also, because he's pretty well spoken on this topic,
Yeah.
but also increasing your luck surface area, going back to your network is your net worth kind of point. You know, your ability to meet people goes so much higher the second you do stuff in public. Like, this podcast is actually a great example. So the last episode, I had a guy, or I guess by this time it would be 2 episodes ago, John Paul Willett, who has a 44 unit retail chain in the Southwest, and I literally met him so randomly. Like, I saw this thread he did that went viral about him basically funding his company through a poker game. Like, this very random occurrence that happened, and it was just such a cool story, well written thread, whatever. And I saw it was getting popular, so I sent him a message being like, "Hey, would love to like have you on the show to talk more about this." And he responded because I had a show. Like, I couldn't just send him, and we end up talking. We've talked now like probably 3-4 times for like I mean, we talked for an hour on the show, and then we've probably had 3-4 other calls. Might even do some work together. Like, there's this awesome new relationship that I have just because of the podcast. Because if I didn't have the podcast and I just sent him a message, he'd be like, "Who is?" He probably wouldn't even respond. And so
Yeah,
once you have these sort of like things out there, because he could he could look, oh, what are the other episodes this guy has done? What is this guy's Twitter page talking about? Like, oh, he has another podcast. What is that one about? Like, there's all this stuff out there that I've done, and that made him more comfortable responding, because I'm sure his DMs, just like most people who, especially when after they have a viral thread, it's not like they have a shortage of DMs of people messaging them. Uh, so it just creates that luck surface area the more stuff you do out in public.
yeah. I think David uses the term serendipity vehicle. Online writing is a serendipity vehicle, I think. And
Yep.
to kind of like double click on that podcast example you gave. Imagine if you went to Carnegie Mellon, right?
Yep.
Imagine if
Yep.
that guy also went to Carnegie Mellon, and then you messaged him on LinkedIn trying to build rapport that way.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, there's
what
a chance
lesson?
he would have responded, but not a
Yeah,
great chance.
exactly, right.
Yeah.
And just it's your proof of work, and it's also a window into people's thought process, like kind of their energy, and like just do they put out positivity, do they put out negativity, and it just increases the surface area of the connections you can make. And when you're on a college campus, like you're confined to those 5,000 students and hundreds of thousands alumni network, and on the internet anyone can be your alumni.
Well, I wish colleges would, and this goes back to like the feedback loops not being there, right? For higher ed, it's like they actually could do this in a very public way. Like, okay,
Yes.
great, you're studying journalism, like go do an investigative 10 episode podcast. That is literally the course. Is go do this. We'll help you do it. We'll help you edit. We'll help you like teach you how to edit, I guess, teach you how to do interview. Like, but your deliverable is a 10 episode investigation into something that of your choice. And you have to go literally put this podcast out in public, and like that's the course. That would be an awesome course. Like, I might even want to take that course. That'd be a cool course to take. But right now, it's like, I don't know, it's like studying an old business model for what journalism was, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, pre internet. And it's not really built for today. Like, you don't need to work for the New York Times today to be a journalist at all. You
No,
arguably are a better journalist not working for any of these institutions.
look at the top two in the field that are crushing it. It's Barry Weiss and Matt Taibbi, and their Substacks are blowing up, and
Yep.
their economics don't make sense to work for the New York Times anymore, just
Right.
because their ceiling's infinite.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's the best in their field, and that's the path that they're doing, taking to get there. And I guess in the same way, right? It's like, I don't know why colleges don't think about helping their students create these artifacts of their work, essentially. Um, a portfolio, I guess,
Proof of work.
some examples, proof of work that an employer could then look at and say, okay, this person has what I'm looking for, or this, and maybe it has something to do with, by doing that, it makes the degree less valuable. I don't know. So what do you think about that?
I can entertain both ideas, right? I think one could just be old systems that have momentum that is very hard to change and move that large moving object of a current college campus. But in part too, I think like it'll create creative destruction if they made a hard pivot to creating artifacts and putting the work out public, which will lead to employment opportunities and just serendipity. So yeah, I don't know if it's case by case, but I imagine that administrators have considered both for not producing in public.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably a combination. It's not just a one or the other thing, but yeah, it's probably a combination.
Yeah, I mean it's a reason like Blockbuster still needed people to come to their stores, even though they built an
Right.
app or they built a streaming service, which then obviously got taken over by Netflix. But like they still have that infrastructure where they need to pay those bills and justify all the kind of old systems.
Yeah. And I guess so now I'd love to talk a little more about like what you're building because one of the problems that somebody could also point to in the online education space, given the credentialing is a little bit amorphous or vague right now, how would like let's say you're a parent of an 18-year-old and you're like, hey, I don't, or a 17-year-old, and you're like, hey, I don't really believe in what higher ed is doing right now, but how do I sift through these new models of higher education and like decide what, or help my kid decide what they should be doing? Like, what's, I guess, like what's the right way for somebody to go about doing that? Because I feel like there is, on one hand, you have these old institutions, and there's like the U.S. News and World Report or whatever that's going to give the rankings and be like, oh, you should go to like the highest ranked school you could get according to our rankings. And then there's like the new world of education, I guess, and it's like the Wild West in some ways.
Yes.
Um, how do you, yeah, how do you sift through that?
um, I mean, the purpose of Unbundled, this platform, is to get like the top tier programs that also de-risk the education process. So we're looking on sifting out quality, and then providing that to the students as kind of being a filter of quality. And like
Yeah,
obviously, like yeah, the amount of it's funny. The I think Balaji Srinivasan has a great quote: "Is like the internet increases variance on all sides of the spectrum." So you have 4 hour long mind blowing podcast with historians that are top of the field, and then you just have like just absolute nonsense. People do, putting out topics they don't that they're talking about that's not interesting. And so in there, it's like the job of filtering and sifting and finding signal in the noise is definitely going to be one of our core functions of vetting these programs. And obviously, myself being an alumni of Bloom Tech, knowing that it's a quality program to put it through, and also being hyper mindful of leading with an ROI positive program for the students.
so what is unbundled? Like if you had to kind of give the elevator pitch, what is unbundled? What are you guys doing? Like both today in terms of like MVP, I feel like is probably
Yep.
where it is today,
Yep.
and then where you kind of want to take it long term.
Yeah. So it's a online marketplace for uh, alternatives in higher education to create a custom college experience for half the time and half of the cost. Um, and so the MVP, my core student or the core user I'm looking for right now, is a high school senior that's 17 years old that wants to learn, become a software engineer or a data scientist, and they don't want to do the 4 year undergrad experience and learn and take classes they're not interested in, and they're more focused on getting income quicker. That's willing to take an alternative program like General Assembly or Bloom Tech, and then pair them and get them on an existing college campus or potentially learning pod or alternative housing like townhouses at current colleges that are built by third parties. But just to keep it simple, um, Bloom Tech student that also gets paired with a college that's willing to accept um, a student that's not directly taking their program, but they want the revenue of an average of 10 to 13 grand of room and board for this alternative
Mm.
student. So they live and work with fellow like-minded students doing Bloom Tech and also are integrated into the environment and the college and campus life um, of existing campus. And
Well,
my pitch
that
to the college,
solves one of the things we were just talking about, which is the college life part of college that you might lose in an online only program.
correct.
Yeah. And so for the college, it helps fill the spare capacity of their, dorms that they might have open.
Yeah, it's they have the infrastructure, they have the high fixed costs, and it'll give them extra revenue, and also potentially these students can buy their ancillary services, right? Like a la carte gym
Yep.
memberships, potentially access into the student union and things of that nature.
Have you tried pitching this to colleges yet?
Not yet. I'm trying to aggregate student demand first, and then use that as a higher leveraging tactic, right? Opposed to saying, I have 10 students, I can say, hey, I have 1,000 students that are willing to pay you 10
Yeah.
grand for a semester. Like, will you What do you consider this?
Yeah, it's a lot easier sales pitch
Yes.
in that
Yeah.
scenario. Yeah. What is that? That's like 10 million in revenue that you're driving at that point? Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have it here. The average room and board for private colleges are $13,620, and then public colleges it's 11,950.
Yeah, so if
So
you have 1,000 students, let's say it's somewhere in the middle of that, 12.5 or something. So that's 12.5 million.
for
That's a
that,
lot.
not pure profit, but obviously the profit margin is going to be
No.
higher. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, but even if it's just revenue, that's not insignificant.
for sure. Especially
So
with. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, so where is this, by the way, like in terms of MVP like stage? Like, so what are you today, like in terms of, let's say somebody goes to the Unbundled website today, fills out the form, what happens next? Like what are they getting?
Yeah, they're getting in the network. Like I said, I'm going to get to a core mass of 1,000 users with their emails and phone numbers, and then filter from there based on location. Um, and then from there, I'll move into partnering with colleges that are in their geographical region or within regions um, that they're willing to travel in. And then within that, they'll be connected with like-minded students looking for alternative educations and can build their own network from there.
What are some examples of that, like people like-minded students? So to be like all computer science students through this kind of like living in the same townhouse or something. Like if there's five computer science students all in like the Philadelphia area, like they could all kind of rent a townhouse together and then kind of be in a more immersive environment.
Immersive environment, get feedback from others, and teach each other, and then just have a network for the next 4 decades, knowing they went through this program, and also looking to attract students who are internet natives that understand the value of building a Twitter audience, understand the value of building a podcast, and in terms of vision, I would love to add that on and add in functions and processes so they can build their own online audiences or something equivalent, just so that you kind of have a mafia network of people that have audiences, email lists, right? Like, imagine if like you knew you got connected with 7 other 18-year-olds that for the next 10 years is going to make 100 Twitter posts a day.
Right. Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the blockers for you right now? Like what's kind of stopping your progress, or what's making it harder?
Just getting this thing off the ground. So registered the domain 3 months ago, delved into the design, the concept, the language, and just the marketing of it to get to the first 1,000 users or email lists. And like as an entrepreneur, you like getting not past escape velocity, but just getting initial traction is probably the hardest part.
Yeah, that's not an easy step. Is just getting, especially for something that is looking for network effects, right? It's like it's
Yeah.
not trivial. Got it. And so, what would somebody who's listening to this is like, wow, this sounds like a great option. Curious to learn more. Should they go to Unbundled? And obviously, we'll put the link in the show notes. What's kind of the best step for them?
Yeah, go. The domain is unbundle.education. The brand name is Unbundled. Um, Go there, submit out your email form, and we'll start building this out. And I will be in contact with you.
Cool. And if somebody wants to learn more about you or talk to you directly, maybe they're at a college, maybe they're at a company, maybe they're just somebody interested in learning more. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can go to my website, peterdavidconley.com. That's PeterDavidConley. I got a email submission form you can do there, or honestly, Twitter's the best. My handle is, yeah, it's awesome. Peter D Conley is my handle, and my
Perfect.
DMs are open.
Yeah, and I'll put links to everything in the show notes also, so people can just click through there if that's easier.
That'd be great.
But but Peter, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. I feel like this is a topic we could talk about for a while, and thank you for at least trying to do something to solve this problem, because I think there's a lot of people out there who would agree with you that this is a problem, but not so many people actually working to solve it every day. So thanks for trying to do something, and wishing you luck, and hopefully you're able to play a role in fixing this education system, because everything is downstream of that. If we fix that, I think like the future looks a lot better.
100%. Yeah, so much of it's downstream of it.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Peter.
Thanks, Neil.